Welcome. Today I'm going to show you how to install Windows 8 or 8.1. Currently we are loading the setup screen. If you'll notice, I was prompted to press a key. You can go back a few frames and check that out. But I did have to press a key in order to initiate the boot process of the DVD. Now, this computer has already been configured in the BIOS to boot from a disk, or to check the disk first before it boots the hard drive. So if there is a disk in the drive and it's bootable, then the computer will try to load off the disk. If there is no disk in the disk drive, then the hard drive will load next as the secondary boot device. So if you don't know how to change your BIOS, please go check out my other video on how to configure the BIOS boot order. It's a very quick change that you need to do, and once you do that, your computer will start recognizing the disk before the hard drive. In this case, since Windows 8 installer detected that I already had a hard drive with a boot image on it, it gave me the option to press a key to boot from disk. Now if you're doing this on a brand new system with no operating system on your hard drive, then this disk will load automatically. You won't be prompted for the press any key. So that's the only difference when you have an existing system that already has a bootable image on it versus a blank hard drive. Okay? So just be mindful of that. If you are reinstalling and you have a Windows on your hard drive right now, you'll need to press that any key button to get the disk to load so you can run the installer. And throughout the installer, we'll go ahead and wipe the hard drive. We'll format it so there's no data on it. So first we're going to select our language. The default should be good for you, so go ahead and hit next. And we're going to click install now. Now there are repair functions here, but we're not going to cover those in this video. So as the setup starts, you know, this process is pretty straightforward. We're going to go through the installer, click the various prompts, and install the operating system. When we're done with that, we'll have some final work to do within Windows as far as getting our hardware that's particular to that computer setup. So if you notice, this menu that you see gives you the option to choose different versions of Windows 8.1. This is a master disk, so it has all the versions. And if you notice the architecture x86 and x64, the x86 represents a 32-bit system. So if you look at your product key that should be attached to your computer, it might say something like Windows 8.1 Pro, 64-bit, or it might just say Windows 8.1 Pro. And if it is just 8.1 Pro with no 64-bit after, it's going to automatically be assumed a 32-bit system, which is architecture x86. Now it's important you get this right because your product key and your version are paired. So you have to select the right version from this list and the right architecture in order for your product key to be accepted. So the only time when you would choose the x64 architecture is when your computer says Windows 8.1 Pro 64-bit. Then you would need the x64-bit architecture. Otherwise, use the x86. So for the purposes of this video, I'm just going to click on the next, and I'm going to accept the terms. I want to do a custom. Okay, you see there's data on my hard drive right now. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to select this one, and I'm going to say delete. And then I'm going to also delete this other partition. So in the end, I should have a bunch of unallocated space. So I have my 60 gig hard drive back. So now I'm going to I can hit next and Windows will do it for me, or I can create my own new partition if I had different requirements. Say I wanted to split the drive into two partitions, I could do that here. In this case, I'm just going to choose the full size. It's going to say, hey, in order for this to work, I have to create some other partitions. You're going to say OK. And you notice we have two partitions now. So we'll go ahead and hit next. And now the system is installing. So once you're done with this and Windows loads up, we're going to need to check the hardware manager and see what drivers are already installed. Now you can retrieve your drivers from the computer manufacturer's website. You go there, look for support and download drivers, and put in your model number and choose your operating system, and you'll be able to download all the drivers that are applicable to your computer. Now what sometimes is confusing is that when you first load up Windows for the first time and you haven't installed any drivers yet, you'll notice that Windows has already supplied drivers for some of your hardware. Now that's great, but if Windows is using generic drivers, then your hardware may not reach its full potential because the driver's limited structure. So you'll want to go, even if you have all your hardware installed already, you'll want to go out to your computer manufacturer's website and download all the applicable drivers for your operating system. Then you'll want to go one by one and install those, restart your computer as needed, and once you complete that process, you're basically done. At that point, you would be ready to install any software that you were missing and get your computer back to where it needs to be. So I don't want to load the disk again because I've already loaded it and Windows is installed. So when you come around that first reboot after the system's installed, don't press any key because you don't want to load the disk. You want to load off the hard drive and you want to complete the setup. So this is in the final stages of completing the installation. Right now it's checking the hardware and seeing if it has any drivers that it can use as generic drivers. So once you get to this next stage, we're going to have to either log in online or create a local account. So one way to ensure that you can create a local account is by unplugging your network card. So I'm going to go ahead and disable mine right now. I just pulled the cable out so that it doesn't try to connect online because I don't want to log in online every single time. I want to be able to use a local account like traditional Windows 7 and prior. Feel free, if you have any questions about this process, go ahead and leave me a comment and I can answer your question. Now for the purposes of this, I'm going to skip. You should definitely put your product key in at that time. I can pick my color. I can type in my computer name. Okay, and we'll hit next. Oh, too long. Alright, we're not going to use express settings. You can if you want. I like to turn off a few things. See, in here we have automatically get device drivers. For the most part this will work, but it is probably best to get them from your PC manufacturer's website, especially if you have some higher end hardware like a GeForce video card or something like that. So all this stuff I can leave on. That's security, privacy stuff as far as websites tracking your location, thing like that. You can have it not supply that information. The only thing I like to turn off here is well, these all look good. Alright, so we'll just go ahead and hit next. And this is the part I don't want to share all this info. So I'm going to go ahead and take some of these off. Okay, so go ahead and hit next, and you just type in your local account, because if I was connected to the internet right now I would be getting a different form and it would want me to use a Microsoft account, which I don't want to do. So go ahead and hit finish, and finalizing our settings. So the desktop should load for the first time in a few seconds. And then we'll go ahead and check the state of our hardware drivers. Now Windows 8.1 is going to be pretty good depending on how old your hardware is. If it's the last few years, obviously it's not going to have everything you need, but if your computer's coming from 7, then most likely you'll have all the drivers already set in there for you. So we're going to go ahead and right click on this, and we're going to go to the computer management right here, and then we're going to go ahead and click on device manager. Okay, now you can see this is the only item that is not installed. So this is the point where you'd want to go out to your computer maker's website and go to their support tab and drivers, put in your model number, and download all the drivers that are applicable to the operating system, in this case Windows 8.1. Go ahead and install those, and you'll go through a series of reboots, but once you get done you should be able to come back in here and see no issues like this. Okay, you want to see everything looking like pretty much like that. Okay, so just kind of check if you have any of those yellow exclamation marks, and you'll resolve those by installing the correct driver.